Fala pessoal do SharpCast, tudo bom com vocês? Eu aqui novamente, passando antes desse episódio para deixar 2 recadinhos para vocês. Primeiro de tudo, falar da nossa parceira BetBra, que está nos ajudando aqui a trazer esse episódio. Vocês já podem ver aqui, né? Temos aqui o nosso QR Code aqui. Mas só para falar um pouquinho dela antes, a BetBra é uma parceira que a gente já usa aqui nas nossas operações diariamente. E ela funciona como um espelho da Pinnacle e também funciona como um espelho da Betfair. Ou seja, ela é uma sportsbook e uma exchange em uma única casa. E com isso, você vai ter várias opções de odds, várias opções de ligas e lugares para você apostar. E a gente recomenda muito porque eles têm uma das melhores odds do mercado, com certeza. Além de funcionalidades diversas que ainda auxiliam a vida do apostador, como planejamento automático de entradas e coisas nesse sentido. Então, se vocês gostam da ideia, o link está aqui no na nossa descrição e também tem o QR Code em algum lugar aqui da tela. É só vocês clicarem lá ou escanearem que vocês vão ser direcionados direto para lá, beleza? E outro recadinho é sobre o nosso outro parceiro, a BetDex, que é uma exchange, ela é bem recente no mercado, mas eles são dos mesmos criadores, dos mesmos fundadores da FanDuel, que é uma das maiores casas aí do mundo. E eles têm uma pegada tecnológica bem diferente, que eles funcionam com padrões de blockchain. Então, é uma novidade bem legal. E com isso eles conseguem trazer muita segurança, conseguem trazer odds excelentes para o mercado. Eu tenho certeza que vocês vão gostar de conferir. O link está aqui na nossa descrição, é só vocês irem lá, fechou? Então bora para mais um episódio.
Bom dia, pessoal. Eu digo sempre bom dia porque presumo que nós temos horas diferentes, que eu acho que vocês vão estar sempre aí de manhã para nos ouvir. Eu queria agradecer esta oportunidade mais uma vez de estar aqui. Hoje temos uma pessoa que eu acho que é uma pessoa muito especial para mim, com quem eu aprendi imenso. Já participou de inúmeros podcasts, é uma das mentes mais importantes que nós temos na nossa indústria. Trabalhou na Pinnacle Sports, trabalhou na SportRadar, começou há muitos anos atrás, trabalhou em empresas de spread betting, sindicatos, já fez um bocadinho de tudo. E hoje vamos estar aqui a falar um bocadinho sobre os novos metodologias que existem nas apostas, o que é que podemos esperar nos próximos anos para o Brasil. E pronto, sem mais, eu vou dar as boas-vindas e agradecer a sua vida. Matthew, thank you very much to be with us. I have presented you in Portuguese. I'm not going to do it in English again because we are going to put some subtitles on this episode. But beginning in the betting industry was some years ago back, and after I think you graduated in economics and politics related, I think. Maybe you want to do a small intro about your journey into the sports betting world.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for having me on. I moved to London to go to university at the London School of Economics. And then after graduating, I didn't have any interest in going into banking or accountancy or any of those things. And I had been working at a bookmaker taking bets over the phone back then. If you go back then, they still took a lot of bets over the phone. And I was doing sort of evenings and weekends for them. And I thought, you know what, I fancy actually trying the bookmaking side of things. And it was what's called spread betting in the UK. And they required a sort of a very high standard, I suppose, of handicapper or compiler or odds maker, however you want to call it. And they were very mathematically minded about the production of odds and how they did it, simulation based, algorithmically where possible, invested in software to do these things. So little did I know at the time that there were many other bookmakers doing nothing like this. But at the time I was impressed. I thought this is pretty cool. And I started out specializing in golf and did rugby as well, which is, both sports were reasonably popular in the UK. And I did that for 6 years. And then I went into foreign exchange for 6 years, basically for the retail environment, I suppose. So the guys who want to trade at home, we provided FX trading and it was heavily leveraged. So anyone who follows the current crypto trading space and sort of is familiar with the concept of leverage, you could deposit 10,000 reals and you'd have the equivalent of 100,000 reals to trade with. They would sort of multiply your deposit effectively to be able to trade much bigger. And this is deliberate. It creates a system whereby people are not very disciplined, and the volatility, the movement in the markets means that your account can get blown up very quickly. But yeah, it was kind of like bookmaking, really, because we wouldn't put the customer's orders into the market. We would just take the order and you pretty much just wait for the accounts to blow up and you keep the money. If ever we had someone who was particularly good, we would pass their orders through to the market. But I would say it's less than 0.1% of people in that. Finance is hard. Financial trading is very hard. So we didn't put many customers through to the market. But yeah, I did it for 6 years. It got a bit boring after a while. And then I went to work for a syndicate who was doing golf mostly on the Betfair exchange. I did that for sort of a couple of years and decided then I needed to get some of my weekends back a little bit because golf is, like many sports, very weekend based. I went and worked at SportRadar. SportRadar at the time were really pushing a product they called MTS, which is Managed Trading Services. And the idea of MTS is that bookmakers can outsource their trading and their risk to a company, so they don't have to pay for traders or anything like that. And MTS was built entirely around player profiling. So the idea is that you would be able to spot the customers that were sharp and be able to limit the amount they could bet based on how they were profiled. The profiling was pretty decent machine learning exercise. It was done, regardless of people's opinion of the outcome. The process was very good. They had a huge amount of data because they did it for about 100 bookmakers certainly at one point. So they had billions of bets to feed the algorithm. And also they were very granular. So I'll give you an example is that now a lot of people complain that, I win on tennis, but I lose on soccer, but I'm limited on everything. And SportRadar did take the move that you could have different limits based on different areas. They sort of acknowledged that it's possible for someone to be sharp in one area and square in another. So they at least had, some flexibility to it. But ultimately that very much just produces very similar day in, day out, all the time kind of process. And then, I had an opportunity to go work with Marco Bluma, who was then trading director at Pinnacle. And I was working with my B2B experience was thought would be helpful for their new B2B project that they were doing at the time, a company called 10-Star, which the idea was it would provide Pinnacle pricing to other bookmakers and help them manage their risk. And then I did that for about a year. And then I got asked by the Pinnacle trading team to come work actually inside Pinnacle's trading, which I did for a couple of years, looking after what they call growth sports. So growth sports are basically, you might call them the minor sports, I guess. But the funny thing is that a lot of the sports I had were not actually that minor. So they may sound not that important, like Japanese baseball, but to the Pinnacle customer base, they were massive sports, big limits, a lot of volume, these kind of things. So I had a lot of European basketball. Brazilian basketball would have fallen under me, these kind of things. And, the Latin American market definitely growing very rapidly. A lot of the sports, a lot of the South American basketball would fall under mine, South American volleyball, for example, as well. So, there was I sort of had a good connection to parts of the world that maybe some of the other departments didn't have as much connection. And again, esports is its own separate department, but Brazil in particular, obviously, like all of South America it's almost an internet first world. I remember going to Peru. My mother's from Peru. And I remember going to Peru, and the internet in '99 was faster in the internet cabins in Peru than it was in London. And there were people who had internet but did not have they'd never had a phone, but they had internet. They literally, like, people were playing World of Warcraft in like internet cabins, and I couldn't even get crappy games to run on my PC. But so it's Latin America kind of just skipped loads of the areas, just sort of skipped that part. But now, like, consequently, esports massive in South America, and it's that's sort of so yeah, a lot of it in just those 2 years I was there, I saw a massive growth spurt in Latin American betting for Pinnacle. And then recently I have now gone out on my own, doing my own consultancy work to try and help bookmakers, syndicates, whoever will hire me to work on their trading.
Yeah, I'm going to open a door here that's about the South American market, because as a consequence probably of that growth that you have seen inside the bookmakers of the South American market, not only esports but others. Brazil now started or almost finishing the process of implementing a legislation package that is going to transform all the ecosystem into a white district where bookies will be legalized, license will be issued. And I'm going to try to do you the same question, but I would like your view, if possible, or your idea in both sides, because you have previously worked in many ecosystems, legalized ecosystems and not so legalized ecosystems, let's say it like this. And Brazil, since 1940, doesn't have an experience of legalized gambling because the casinos were banned in the 40s. And so I pretty think that sometimes it's easier, like we have seen in the United States, because all the casinos also have a sports betting license and all that kind of stuff. But if you were to operate in a new ecosystem like Brazil, very big ecosystem, and with the process of the licenses, I think some stronger groups like Flutter for sure will be there. If you had something to form there, like let's say trench betting group, what would your concerns, what would be your focal points of analysis in the beginning? Because everything is growing now from not ground zero, but almost from ground zero. Do you have any?
Well, yeah, I mean, so it all starts with the boring stuff. It starts with going through all the regulation and seeing what is possible and what's not, and also getting a sense of the attitude of the government, who, whenever a country goes into a licensed state for their gambling, you can get a feel for whether they are not that in. They've done it just because they feel like, we should do it. Some tax is better than no tax, kind of thing. And then you can see that there are others that are doing it aggressively for the moral reasons. They want to control it. And then there are some that sort of just have this greed that it's like, this is a great way to make a lot of tax. So you get a kind of feel for the mentality behind the country as to what they're trying to do, and it's often reflected in the rules that they draw up, the tax system. So, interesting thing is that a topic that's always relevant for people from the UK is that there's no tax on winnings, gambling winnings in the UK. However, Brazil is bringing in, I don't know what the level, there's a level, isn't there? But you pay tax above a certain amount.
It changed when they presented the package. It was some level. Now they increased it a little bit, but it's GGR driven. So it's the players are going to pay for a certain amount after the winning. So and it's small, but it's GGR driven, like 15%, something like that.
So I always find this interesting, because if you're going to tax winnings, the implication already is that, taxing luck is never really fair, but taxing skill, like a job, is different. So when I look at professional bettors in the US and professional gamblers in the UK, this is the big difference, is that if you're being limited in the UK, the perception is that everyone loses gambling. That's why we don't have a tax. We used to have betting tax in the UK, but the idea is that the bookmakers can pay all the tax, take it away from the player paying the tax, because the player always loses, so therefore the bookmaker pays the tax. In the US, professional gamblers, they have to pay taxes on the winnings. So I think a US professional gambler has a greater argument to say, why are you limiting my ability to earn money when I pay tax? I legitimately pay the federal government taxation of my winnings. So that's one thing that I was interested. So that was one of the first things I looked at in Brazil was taxes on winnings. You look on their attitudes towards advertising. Are they going to be okay with because the US, we had this explode, like every TV advert on every single sports channel was, and non-sports channels was DraftKings, FanDuel over and over again.
Yeah.
And so I would be looking at like what Brazil's attitude is towards bonuses. Are you allowed to give bonuses? Are you allowed to give deposit bonuses? Are you allowed, all these things? And so I then get a feel for what they think is the right bookmaker for Brazil. And I then ask myself, if I'm a new person coming in, can I deliver it? So I would say that 365 has been by far the largest bookmaker in Brazil, looking back at the past, 10 years, whatever. So they're of the opinion that they already understand the customer, what the customer wants, and they have scale. They can soak up the costs. They don't need to bonus as aggressively because people know the brand, for example. So they have all these advantages. And I think to myself, right, can I compete with that? If I'm going in this environment where I can't do much bonusing, the attitude is maybe not go crazy, guys, do whatever you want. That's not the way the Brazilian government has looked at this. So then the question is, right, so I'm looking at other products that are differentiated from, as you say, the Betfair brand name is known in Brazil, 365, the Betson group of bookmakers, they're known in Brazil. And I'm thinking to myself, is there something probably that I can get into that's not those things? The other key factor always when operating a bookmaker, and again, it's super boring, is banking. And of course, in Brazil, that means picks. I think I read something like over 90% of all deposits to bookmakers are via picks. Maybe more than 95% even.
Yes.
So you have one body that has a grip on everyone.
Yes.
And they will choose their processing fees. And I can imagine those processing fees are going to be
a big selling partner. Yeah.
creeping up, So I then look to myself, how feasible is it for me to be able to get Brazilian players away from big brands? How easy is it for me to process their deposits cheaply if I'm not doing, if I don't have like 1 million active customers? What's my negotiation power? Not much. So I probably to be honest, my first important thing I'd be looking at is how big the adoption of cryptocurrency is in Brazil. That's something that's important to me.
Not big, yeah.
Not big. So that's one of the areas where I'm sort of focusing on, because that's the only way that we can be free of banking costs in many ways, or the biggest banking costs. And at that point, I'm looking to see, can I survive as a licensed entity in Brazil against that competition? It looks tough in Brazil right now for people who aren't big already, I would say.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupt you. I have something I would like to ask you now in the middle of your answer. I'm sorry, because I think it's very relevant, and I cannot have a clear idea on this, because I'm going to compare it with the Portuguese ecosystem, which is a little different because we are not GGR driven. But if the only advantage or the biggest advantage of a bookie to settle in a legalized ecosystem is the ability that you have to advertise, But if you take the bonus out of the legislation package, you don't allow them to eat the clients with those bonus. I'm not really sure what's going to happen with the acquisition cost of the players, because all the black market can simply tell someone, look, put 500 real here, we'll double it with a free bet. So you are giving someone the power and the ability for a big cost, because the licenses are expensive, to act in a legalized ecosystem, but still you are taking the ability of bonuses, which probably would lower a little bit sometimes the acquisition cost of the players, and all black market that is going to operate over there, because for at least some time, I'm not sure how government is going to act on those, but the black market will be there with the bonuses, and then they can deliver those to the clients. I think this is very inconsistent. I'm not sure if you have the same opinion than me on this.
It's a huge challenge, and it's called, in sort of the betting industry discussions, it's called channelization. And people hope when they go licensed that there will be a high channelization rate. So they hope that all the people will bet with licensed bookmakers in the country, so that they can get the tax. So they want a high channelization. And there are numerous examples now that we can observe. So, for example, a huge percentage of Germany's gambling spend is lost to, the black market, shall we say. More Germans bet with Maltese licensed, online casinos than they do with anything that's, licensed in Germany. And the German government tells themselves that they have good channelization, though. They think they're doing a good job, but all the figures that are put in front of them suggest that huge, millions and millions of euros are going outside of Germany. Denmark is considered to have, I think, pretty good channelization. And Danske Spil, which is the Danish national bookmaker, actually has... So you will see these things where you see a national lottery kind of bookmaker, and it's two things, A versus B, and it's like 1.7A, 1.7B, right? You see that kind of stuff. You see it in like states in America that only have one bookmaker, this kind of thing. But Danske Spil, for example, they kind of do things 1.91, 1.9. They do that kind of stuff. They operate it well, and that helps you with your channelization. Plus, they have retail. That's the other thing, is it's hard to be black market and offer retail. So in Brazil, I don't know what the betting shop culture is. I don't know how easy it is to put terminals into a gas station or a wherever. I don't know how easy it is to do those things. But there's the advantage, obviously, if you're licensed, that you can offer betting, in cash in betting shops. And the reality is that the smaller the average monthly wage per household is in the country, the more retail kiosk betting there is. So the peak of this is Africa, where there is a huge amount of tiny transactions. So I would expect Brazil not to be as big as, Brazil is very online, so I wouldn't expect it to be like Africa. But I still would expect there to be quite a few bets placed, in cash over a counter. So that will affect channelization in the sense that the licensed operators will have retail betting positions. So a lot of money will go through those. But yeah, it's to be honest, if you're too restrictive with your legislation, you force money. You just make the black market products that much more competitive and attractive. Now, there is this factor that they try to quantify, that there are people who just don't feel comfortable knowing that they're using something that isn't official. Yeah. So you always get that kind of, and often the kind of customer that feels that way is a very good customer, because they're the kind of person that never break any rule, they've never done anything, and they just want to bet their 10 real. They're kind of good cut. So, having a license means that you get that type of customer. and getting that type of customer has got good lifetime value to the account. So it's kind of a tricky thing, and often if you operate in the kind of the black market into a licensed country, you get some customers who have a lot of gamble in them. They want to gamble big, they want the bonuses, etc. But you also get some customers who are not being serviced by the license bookmakers because they've been kicked out or restricted or whatever. So it's a real mix. You never know what you're going to get when you operate like that. So, but yes, I think it is across. I think a lot of times the licensing is too aggressive in terms of what they do, and they will force people. We've seen, as I say, multiple examples where people are betting Netherlands, Germany, these kind of countries where they've been so aggressive, and people are still, betting with their bookmakers that they like that are non-licensed.
Yeah. Okay. Do you know that? Probably Brazilian market, there are many influencers, big influencers. Brazil is a country with 220 million people, so it's basically, I don't know, Flamengo as more supporters than probably all the 4 times the population of Portugal. So if you want to compare it like this, there are 4 times more supporters from Flamengo than all Portuguese people inside my country. So there are huge influencers, and when I say huge, I say there are people with channels in social media that have more than 250,000 followers, and they are some kind of niched into 3 categories. Ones who throw their publicity and their picks, their touting service per se, using an American expression, into the Bet365s, the Betanos, and all those soft bookmakers. And then there is another breed that doesn't even has ever heard of high frequency trading, but they are day trading into Betfair Exchange. And for me, Betfair Exchange has changed a little bit in the recent years, especially in some markets. We are not going to speak about cricket markets for sure, because cricket still has huge volume there. But in some markets like football or some products, I think they're starting to lack that not so sharp money, and all the big groups are making their trades over there. So it's maybe bot against bot, syndicate bot against syndicate bot, for fighting for those small margins. And do you think that with these high frequency market makers that Betfair has now, the ecosystem would be good for Betfair to invest as Betfair brand in this kind of ecosystems? Because the exchanges, they need high volume so they can win on the trades. And I think with the taxation increasing, maybe their margins should increase also, or you don't think this is a problem?
So do I think this problem is in terms of getting it popular in Brazil, or do you think a problem as in...
No, it is popular right now, and like 30% of the market is hanging on Betfair, but they are hanging on Betfair, and Betfair has no tax to pay to the Brazilian government. But if they do have some, because they have more costs, because now they are probably will have more, the compliance has to be different, because they need to comply with rules. They have their costs of operation. Probably they would need to have someone inside Brazil. They have to build their own teams inside Brazil. So the operation costs are going up. Do you think it would still be a good ecosystem for Betfair to operate?
Does the current Brazilian legislation actually categorize exchanges and how they should be treated?
They allow them, because I think no, I'm sure that for instance, let's say that Flutter opens the asks for the license, they can explore 3 brands. So probably some of the brands we know already which ones would be, but for instance, Betfair is a different product. It's an exchange, and yes, it's possible to operate an exchange under the legislation.
So I think what will depend is how they choose to tax an exchange, obviously, because the exchange will say it's P2P, so player versus player with commission, and the viability of the exchanges will be based upon. So I imagine you're familiar that Betfair commission rates change around the world, depending on the conditions that they have to operate in. And the Betfair, Betfair wants low commissions. They know that that's the way they will generate the most total money, is by having a larger volume with a lower commission rate. But when they have these high commission rates, it's often just because there's no other choice. A horrible example is things like there are certain greyhound racing tracks in Australia where it's over 10% commission, because they have to pay a fee to the bodies in Australia for that track. And it's like, who wants to trade something with 10% commission? It's just crazy. So so it will depend on how the Brazilian government treats the finances of an exchange. And yes, the reality is that whether they know it yet or not, the Brazilian government, with the way that they handle that, could either make exchanges massive in Brazil, or it could snuff them out like that with the wrong type of law in place. So yeah, I would be interested to know how they tackle it, because you want them to you want them always to be an option. Every country should have an exchange as an option if they can. That's people should have the choice, right? So hopefully, the Brazilian government will treat them as a separate. They'll treat them as the first things first is they must treat them differently, because they are different.
Yeah.
So hopefully they do that, and then if they do that, hopefully they don't just treat them differently. They treat them differently, and they treat them as, a better, that they're a lower margin business than the bookmaker is. I think right now we're seeing a lot of, like, if anyone follows Alex Kane, who's the CEO of SportRadar in America.
SportRadar, yeah. We had him here already in the podcast.
So he is becoming fast, whether he likes it or not, an expert in the costs of these exchanges and running them in different ecosystems. So he, there is a bare minimum that you need for an exchange to survive. So let's just hope that Brazilian gives you a level, Brazil gives a level that is workable.
Yeah, I'm now very keen, as you know, we've spoken off air already several times. I'm very keen on the new Web3 based exchanges that are thriving over there, because basically the commission rates are much lower, and it's just a question of which market makers are there, which price systems and liquidity, of course, that's attached to the market making. But saying this, I would like to ask you a question, because it is common now that with the liquidity all over being not as big as it was before, and I'm not talking the liquidity nowadays that we are, the next month it will be fantastic, because with the Euro, football liquidity, it will be immense. Everybody's sending emails now. We have increased our max bets for 400k. We have increased our max bets for 200k. So liquidity is not an issue in June, but normally during the regular seasons, it is an issue. And my question is now, with all the syndicates creating their own sports books, exchanges, creating their own liquidity pools, how do you see the ecosystem in like 2 or 3 years? And we are not talking just Brazil, I'm talking the ecosystem as a whole, because when we are talking about the finance world, we know that the ecosystem is a whole, it's one, but here you have smaller niches and smaller pools And do you think it will be more polarized, or you think the liquidity in the future will tend to be more as a whole, like in the finance industry?
Well, I mean, so the funny thing is the finance industry went through a period of hyper specialization. You know, in FX, I used to know people who specialized in market making one currency pair. Might have been, you know, USD BRL. You know, it might literally be in US dollar BRL, and that's all they did. And they provided an extra tight spread, and they were like the place. So, but what happens is that when you get this fracturing of hyper specialization, you create a marketplace for someone to come in and build aggregators. So sometimes people look at finance and they say, look, you know, I can do everything with one platform. And it's like, what you don't know is that when you submit your order, that order is then being posted to 19 venues of 6 different currencies with 8 different liquidity providers per venue, et cetera, et cetera. A huge level of complexity. So for me, like, we don't need to worry. No, we don't need to think about what the 365 or the Flutter or whatever is doing in 5 years' time. They'll do what they've always been doing. They'll carry on to do that. It's that. What, you know, when I look at things like, as you mentioned, the syndicates who provide their own liquidity pools, when I look at the exchanges, when I look at like the Web3, you know, like the BedDex, Monaco Protocol project, when I look at all these things, you know, even like Gnosis and the Augur and like the really old, like, you know, blockchain exchanges and all that, I think to myself, in reality, there's always clever people behind them with a limited amount of development time and money, and they're always just fighting day to day to eat, to make enough money. And where possible, you know, if someone can come in and provide a banking solution for these things, because again, if you're processing a lot of transactions, you negotiate a better rate. So one exchange negotiating with a bank has less power than if 5 exchanges got together and negotiated for their costs. You know, if you can get someone who can provide good, like, you know, on-roading onto crypto. Let's say if I could just literally go up to a guy in the street and give him 10,000 real and say, transfer this to Bitcoin for me, please. And the guy was like, give me your phone, done. If that was super easy, that would help the ecosystem. If there was a, you know, I've always been a fan because, like, so the syndicate that I worked for is owned by the same guy who founded Gambit, which makes the Molybet brokerage platform. Some people may know it as Bet in Asia or Sport Market Pro. They're different skins, same product though. I love the fact that, because I came from finance, I love the fact that I got multiple books in one place. You know, that to me is a great. I'd love to see these kind of things. And the thing is that it takes the, like, let's say you're an exchange, and it's like you can put yourself into a brokerage platform. Then it's like, well, they can then do the marketing. Those people can promote the brokerage platform. I need to concentrate on what I do. And what I do is I build APIs and I make fast, you know, I make sure that the prices move as fast as possible. You know, I do these things that I know about. So, but everyone, you know, greed is everywhere. Everyone just wants to earn their piece always. But yeah, I think for me, like, what will be for the non-big corporation bookmakers, in 5 years' time, it'll be about how well they work together with these small bits and pieces, how well they learn to work together with each other. If someone got together and, you know, let's say you're in Brazil and you said, you know, Betfair, you know, Matchbook, BetDex, you know, Smarkets, whoever, like if you came and said to them, I want every exchange on Brazil X.br, you know, and that person then has to do a lot of work to integrate all of that, because, you know, the exchanges will do what all these bookmakers and providers will do, what they always do. They go, well, how much business is it? And you're like, I'm building it. I've got no idea. No business yet. but to build it, they'll be like, I don't know if we've got time for it, whatever. So it takes someone who just doesn't give up, just keeps on going and going to build these things. And then hopefully everyone's like, this is amazing. BrazilX is like the best platform there is. They allow you to use Pix to buy a voucher, and then that voucher I can deposit to get Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin I can then get into my whatever it is. You got to make these clever little, like, you look at all these great businesses, and so often they're this close to the law, this close. They just found a way to get around it, And people kind of like, oh, I'm not sure about that. It's like, what? Not sure about Amazon having their main offices in Luxembourg? It's like everyone's doing this crap, So it's like, to me, it's like, yeah, the small fighting brands kind of need to group together, I would say, and by grouping together, maybe they can build something that is like it won't be as big. Like people need to sort of switch their minds on. It's not going to be as big as like a 365, but it can be a very good business that makes good money for lots of people.
An interesting story. I have a lot of friends in the betting world, in the syndicate world, and I was speaking with a particular individual from the UK some months ago, and he said to me, "Look, we are just trading cricket, live cricket." I said, "Yeah, cricket? Oh, wow. So what's the turnover on that?" And he said, 70 million a game. And I said, "What the 70 million a game?" Yeah. And I had no idea. I had no idea the possibility of cricket generating that much turnover. This is impossible with the small exchanges. This is possible now with some Betfair and some Betfair with some leverage from India, deep India stuff, for sure. But saying this, how big do you think nowadays is position taking compared with all the liquidity that you have? If you have to estimate, you would say position is 20% of the betting in the market, maybe more? It's a complex question, but maybe an idea.
Yeah, it is a complex question. I could say that historically there was much less. People were much more risk averse, and people are more risk positive now. But I think it's. I couldn't tell you I think it's very. I think there'll be people out there. So if we look at sort of something like the agent system that has always existed in Asia, once upon a time, it did completely different to the sort of Indian exchange market, but once upon a time 50-50 was very common with the agent and the book, and then it became 70-30 for the agent, and then you get to like 80-20, and then some books are like 85-15, these kind of things. So there are more and more people who know that to get the most out of their customer pool, they have to be taking on bigger positions. And they also have grown more confident over the years. They see players losing year after year after year. So, yeah, I feel like Asia's got to be far closer to 80-20 than 50-50. It's got to be more there. But with the Indian betting exchange environment, that's not. I've never worked with any of those agents, and I've never sort of seen inside that. So I don't think I could make a guess about it. But I definitely would say that I bet they're taking a lot more risk now than they were 20 years ago. That's for sure.
Yeah, but the thing is, Asia is a little bit depressed right now. Singbet is probably leaving the professional market, and they provide collaterals for many books to put their money over there. So, but let's not go deeper than this in the liquidity stuff. I had a big curiosity because recently you have worked with a very wider niche of sports, and when I say sports, I can include also something because we have US is going to vote for the next president. We see golf nowadays. We see cricket increasing the volume. We see tennis as a great sport to bet, very liquid sport. We have seen a growth in esports, especially since COVID. And if you had to guess, do you have any ideas how the sports would, which sports will be most, which sports would provide the biggest turnover in the upcoming years? The ones I have mentioned, do you see someone increasing in the popularity? Do you see syndicates willing to build models and platforms to operate other sports?
So, I mean, I'm still able to be surprised. So, I mean, golf, for example, is not something that in the UK market or Australia or, you know, sort of the traditional homes of where there was golf betting, is not something that had been trending strongly. You know, there had been some form of live golf betting for many, many years. Many years they offered, you know, who would win the event during the event, because, you know, while there was a lot of things going on, by the time you got to Sunday, one human could trade it quite effectively, as long as the pictures they could see were quick, you know. So it wasn't like there was any dramatic change in the product. But then the US opened up, and golf had been popular. I mean, still is popular on both FanDuel and DraftKings as a daily fantasy product.
Yeah.
And that translated very well to, because the largest part of FanDuel and GK's like organic customer generation is from that customer list, basically the original customer list. They brought over, and so the golf volumes were much larger in America than I was expecting. So, and the reality is that if you see a lot of volume, then bookmakers aren't stupid. They are going to double down. They'll advertise more. They'll do more bonusing on it. They'll promote it more. They'll try to add more markets, etc. So that will be interesting. Golf is a game. I mean, the average age of the average golfer is still going up across the globe, and golf membership at clubs is going down across the world. So there was a big, huge hope like 10, 15 years ago that Asia would be the most you know, lots of new wealth, new money. China would build 1 billion golf courses. You know, it hasn't happened yet. You know, Asia has not become a golfing power. There's lots of people who like golf in Asia, and there's plenty of rich businessmen that like golf, but it's not like kids aren't desperate to become professional golfers in Asia. You know, even with Tiger Woods' mother being from Thailand, you know, there's not. They still would rather play for Barcelona than they would, you know, play PGA Tour golf. So, you know, there's that. So that does surprise me. Whether that will be more sustainable long term, that kind of big golf volume, I'm not too sure. I think MMA will continue to grow. I think as long as that product is managed well. I mean, obviously Dana White is Dana White, but I think that MMA still like ticks a lot of, you know, it's not corporate. It's not about suits and ties. It's not about, you know, there's still guys who come from, fighting is always great. You get people from poor backgrounds who like prove themselves and make it. So the storylines are good. With good storylines, betting follows. You know, that's always a good thing. So I've definitely seen that volume creep up and up and up and up. And some of the bigger players in the world, they like to bet MMA, you know, particularly UFC, but you know, it's so that I would hope would grow. I would see. So esports is, you know, very, very big for my previous employer. And I'm sort of on the cusp in that esports faces some challenges in that I think the 3 core games, I don't know if they'll have the same appeal in 10 years' time as they do now. You know, even if we look at the new game, you know, like there's only so many different types of game that sort of make good esports. Like Valorant. Valorant has taken off. It's definitely doing some reasonable betting numbers. But you know, it's still we're still talking like first-person shooter clone of, you know, other games. So I think sometimes I think to myself, will the next generation of kids always want these games and play these games? I don't know. I mean, obviously CS:GO has just survived for forever, but I kind of worry about that being. I used to think that like, oh, this is definitely going to grow because there'll be more and more kids who will just, because like people think like, oh, you know, people think, oh, the best esports bettor is like age 20. And it's like, no, people who are 20 got no money. Best esports bettor is the guy who played all the games when he was younger and he's 35, got a good job, you know. So I kept on thinking that as those people came through, that would be a big growth area. But, you know, soccer dominates all. It's still the world's game. I can expect to see probably, if basketball continues to trend, you know, NBA's traction in China is immense. NBA is doing the NBA Africa project.
Yeah.
You know, like basketball again, you can play it anywhere. It'll continue to be popular with people playing it. I can see their betting sort of trending. In terms of like seeing like a new growth opportunity, yeah, it's hard to see where it would come from at this point. You know, you can have little bursts of betting volume when something sort of catches, but yeah, I to be honest, I would say probably MMA would be my best hope of a big news.
It's interesting. I have never thought of MMA. I have some questions related to this to ask you. Do you think the races, especially the horse racings in the UK, are in some kind of jeopardy because the people who tend to bet races have a higher age average than most? Because I don't see young kids betting as much the races that they used to. Do you think the races are a problem?
Yeah, I'd say, you know, horse racing in Britain is struggling a lot. You know, betting is very dependent. The betting industry is very dependent on its key customers, its VIP customer base, and horse racing even more than all the rest of it. So horse racing is very dependent on a small number of customers who bet a large amount of the volume.
Yeah.
And the UK faces the double problem of those people are getting older and dying, and also they're making it harder and harder to deposit large amounts of money into UK bookmakers to bet with. So yeah, UK horse racing is being squeezed from different directions. You'll get pockets of like big attendance to certain race meetings where a lot of young people go. They have a really enjoyable day out, but that's not enough to sustain the sport. You know, you need people going all the time, you know, regularly. And yeah, they just you know, horse racing is entirely dependent in the UK on, well, yes, there's some sponsorship, but predominantly what they call the levy, which is the tax that bookmakers pay to the horse racing body. And yeah, so if there's less people betting on it, then less money goes into horse racing. Less money into horse racing means less prize money. Less prize money means less new horses, and less new people want to get into it. You know, they go where the money is. So yeah, it's a tough spot, no doubt.
I thought I always divided in my head the three races were one thing, one ecosystem. Sports betting was another, and esports was another, and now maybe politics mixing somewhere in the middle. But the races now, I see it very depressed market. I'm not particularly happy on it. I don't work with races, but I'm not particularly happy with it. I'm a chess man myself. I've entered this from chess, and you have worked recently with chess. Even you have shared in a podcast from a friend a very interesting story about the chess. And I know India is making huge investment in chess now. They have, from the top 20 players in the rating, they have probably at least 6 or 7 players in top 20, and they will have eventually a world champion. Can chess, especially in that hub, or be an important sport, or do you don't think the game dynamics would allow it to be a bettable sport?
So, I mean, it faces like one thing that people should always remember is that soccer would be even more popular if it didn't have a draw to bet on. People should remember this. Like, the bookmaker always loves the draw, and the bettors are almost never winning when the draw happens. So chess faces this problem. So let's say you had a country which was very invested in chess. Being into a sport does not always translate to betting volume, because it's how well does the sport lend itself to being bet upon. Now, blitz and bullet, yeah, maybe that's maybe more of I mean, you can do draw no bet, or you can do just like push. You don't have to price three-way markets. I don't know. It's tricky. In theory, it's a perfect sport to offer in the sense that most of the time, there are obviously big examples quite recently, but most of the time the integrity within chess is good. Most people are playing straight, and the rating system naturally lends itself to calculating probabilities. So if you have good ratings, and so it shouldn't be hard for bookmakers to do prices. The Russian books offer lots of chess still. It's easy to offer the prices. So it really is just about the people's appetite. But let's say all these kids going through the Indian academies, they've got to grow up. They've got to want to have a bet at all. Some people don't even like betting. And then not only have they got to have a bet, love to have a bet, but they've got to want to bet on that, not the IPL, if they like to have a bet. It's kind of like it's never say never, but yeah, I'm kind of interested that they made that push, because it's kind of it's old school developing country. Like, so when USSR had the chess program, it was to make it look like our country is smart, look like we are competing with the best. And thinking about Modi, I suppose I can see how Modi would love the idea of India is smart. Look at how smart we are because we've got so good at. I can see that logic, but whether it will be just like a trend for now, or whether in 50 years' time, India will have 1 billion absolutely obsessed with chess Indians, I guess we'll see. But yeah, I mean, there's no big betting sports where there's where no one likes the sport. So you do have to start with lots of people liking the sport. So and chess is definitely stabilized. At one point, chess was on the decline in terms of like general players of the game, and I think online chess really like came on. Kind of chess had a boom in COVID, even and it's like.
Netflix helped with that
Queen's Gambit, yeah, that was good. Yeah, so I can definitely see like certainly within certain countries the appreciation for the game and the sport to sort of rise, and yeah, maybe we'll have to wait. We'll wait and see, like, because India's always on the cusp of like legalizing at any given point. So for all I know, you never know when they're going to put like a weird, because like Japan, it is actually legal in Japan to bet, but there's like 8 sports, and it's like Kirin cycling, power boating, sumo. It's like So who knows? Yeah, maybe India could throw in a clause where they don't allow betting on chess. I don't know, but yeah, well, yeah, I couldn't possibly guess as to what will happen there, but it's got to be more popular than it's got to not going to be. It's got to be it's got to beat people's desire to bet on cricket, which is just massive. So
Yeah, massive cricket. But even in football, soccer. I'm sorry for my English. Sometimes goes to the US English. But football, even football is changing, because I take a look at football and I see what has happened for the last 10 years in the American industry, especially the American industry that has been more in the NBA side. Kids nowadays don't bet sides and totals. They bet that certain player is going to make exactly or more than X tackles or X. It's getting, well, it's good for one side, because adverse selection it will always be there, so more probably mistakes from bookmakers will appear. But for a guy that has been here for some years, it's complex. It's like a different sport, because the perspective is player driven and not the team as an aggregate. So the price for that is completely different. And some sports like soccer, I think they are what they are right now because I see a lot, especially in the UK ecosystem, because most of the guys I'm in the groups with sometimes, I like the 60 passes from this guy. The ball goes from this guy 60 passes. And I said, I have no idea, I have no clue on this. And do you think that the new generations, because I think this is related, that these guys, they don't like Manchester City, maybe they like Haaland, they don't like this, they like a special player, these new generations. Do you think this can be the future, like the micro betting, the guys betting only props? Is this going to be important to specialize in the future?
So it's kind of strange. Like to me, football will always be the ultimate team game. It's clock based, and everyone needs to be constantly moving and constantly adapting to what's going on and where the ball is positioned. And yes, we have some players that quote dominate a game, but quite often the storyline is the team. Leicester winning the Premier League, it was Leicester. Yes, people knew Jamie Vardy, people knew, some of the players, but it was still Leicester. That was the storyline. Whereas in the States, people might go, oh, how did LeBron play last night?
Yeah, exactly.
Not the team. How did LeBron play last night? And America is the culture of the individual. It's literally within the culture, and their sports are designed to isolate the individual, the pitcher, the batter, the quarterback, the point guard, the center. It's like everything is based around allowing a single person to excel and deliver an incredible result, which means that the storylines are based around individuals. And this is why, so people sort of was like, oh, I didn't think player props, I knew that Americans like their stats and stuff, but I didn't think player props would be quite as big as they are. And player props with SGPs, the same game parlay, would be quite as big as they are. But looking back now, we can all just slap ourselves because we're like, it was just obvious it was going to be like that. But, but like with football, it's like, even when you have people like, Cristiano Ronaldo, when you have, Lionel Messi, Haaland, whoever it is, even when you have these hugely dominant, it's sort of so, it's kind of like just really, the markets feel kind of bored, to score the first goal or to score a goal, assists, pass, like it's kind of, there's very few things that are connected to kind of a good storyline. It really is only those biggest players that have a storyline. So, betting, in the back, back when Messi was at Barcelona, betting Messi to have more than, more over 1.5 goals and Barcelona to win and both teams to score, whatever, you could kind of tell yourself, yeah, I think Messi's going to have a great game because he's been playing great. I think Barcelona are going to win because they got Messi. And I think that both teams are going to score because Barcelona haven't been defending quite well. It's all about, can you create the storyline for the bet? And with someone like that, when you've got a big name player, it's quite easy. But, West Ham, my team, the Jim Bowen narrative, what is the narrative? It's like, I want West Ham to win, and the whole team has been playing okay, or the whole team has been playing well, or that's the kind of thing. So I actually think it's sort of slightly hurt soccer that it's hard to make that kind of player-based bet interesting. But people still love just supporting their team, and there's more football fans than any other sport in the world. So people still like to bet on their team. So soccer's not going to struggle. But yeah, it is interesting that in the American markets, and any other times that you're going to get sports where there is like this strong storylines around the player. I just think to myself, like the number of bets in the NFL that must be like team to cover the point spread and quarterback to pass more than their passing yards. It's like, yeah, my team's going to win. We're not just going to win. We're going to cover the spread. And then we're not just going to cover the spread. We're going to cover the spread because my guy's going to throw 6 touchdowns. It's like, it's such a positive mental image, Everything's going to be amazing. And then I'm going to win my bet because we're amazing. It's like, it's a feel-good bet. There's like, people talk about like, everyone betting overs. It's like, we bet overs. Yeah. It feels good to bet overs. It feels aspirational. It feels positive. And yeah, when you got a game like soccer where it can be like 1 or 2 goals in it, to be asking for over half a goal for a player or whatever, it's just not as. It feels like it feels like I could lose a lot of these, whereas on any given night, LeBron can get over 23.5 points or whatever. It feels like your opinion can be less luck based, even though it's exactly the same amount of luck based, but like you almost feel like you have more control over the destiny of your bet, I think.
Yeah, I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking the recency bias and all the biases in the world conflicting into one individual in the bar, and I'm perfectly taking a look at that picture. We have 1 hour and something from the podcast. I want to have the opportunity to invite you once again in some time. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I have 2 more final questions. One of them I miss a lot, Inside Betting. Do you miss Inside Betting podcast?
I still enjoy coming on podcasts like this one. I'm glad I did those podcast episodes. They helped me like arrange some of my thoughts. They helped me feel like I was able to get some of my thoughts out of my head and into the world. It definitely was, served a purpose for me. But I feel like coming on podcasts like this satisfies that itch that I maybe have still. I don't feel the need to go out and create, I suppose, my own. I'm very happy to support other people's projects, and I don't feel the need at the moment to have my own content project. Maybe it's laziness, I don't know, but yeah, I don't see it coming back. I don't see it coming back anytime soon. But at the same time, I've done a few podcasts in the last few months, and I always enjoy talking about betting. So it's always like I kind of think to myself, as long as I do a few episodes a year of some other people's podcasts, And if me being on that podcast helps that podcast, that makes me feel really, if ever anyone says to me like, "Oh, we've just posted your episode," and then a week later they say, "Oh, it's done quite good numbers," I feel so happy about that, because not because I need the ego boost, but because it's nice. Like, people put so much effort into content, and like, people maybe realize, maybe they don't, but it's really hard to make money out of content. It's really hard to make it worthwhile.
We are not doing it for money. We're just doing it because it's also, we are trying to give back. Especially me, when I was invited to host the show, I'm doing it because I feel the need to give something back, especially to this community. But I have listened to your podcast with Jason Trost, and you shift places with him. You interviewed him. It was a very good episode. I enjoyed it much. And when I say I missed your podcast, it's because sometimes I think in those episodes, especially I remember the one you have made to provide an answer or a conversation with the American community. And when I listened to those episodes, I listened to them more than once, because I was not only listening to your knowledge, but I was trying to listen to your thoughts. What was the mechanics inside your head, and how you were making a structure of everything in the ecosystem. And I think your mind is different from most of the minds in the industry, because you have very analytical process of thinking, but you also have the ability to transform that into a wider picture. So that's very important for the industry, and we need more inside bettings all over to listen to people's thoughts, because sometimes it's not because you are right or because you are wrong, it's because you have an idea of how something works, and that's basically very important. And the second question I have is because I think that one of the biggest challenges nowadays is to find an equilibrium. And we have spoken a little bit about expected value, regulation. Maybe we have spoken briefly about the execution, how to execute. But do you think, or do you still think, or do you still believe that as a benchmark, everybody is looking at the holy grail of the Pinnacle line? I have my own thoughts about those. I'm not going to, it's not the right time to share or to lose time with those thoughts. But do you think spread betting still can be a good tool to benchmark? Because spread betting, no one, or points bet, no one speaks about that in the industry. I think they minimize their importance, and I do think that spread betting still is a very sharp ecosystem. And you work there, and you know a lot about spread betting.
Yeah, so I mean, so the people who I worked with, 2000 to 2006, that kind of era, still remain. I still speak to a good few of them today. Still remain some of the sharpest minds that I've worked with in betting. And when IG Index stopped doing sports spread betting, a large portion of those spread betting traders, they wanted to stay in spread betting, so they went to either Sporting Index or SpreadX. And now Sporting Index has been closed, and so the only home in the UK for them left is SpreadX. And I think ultimately, even I remember being, I hope no one from SpreadX listens to this and is offended, but I remember being called into a meeting at SportRadar because a client wanted to start taking more feeds. Feeds are just aggregated odds, so average odds of several bookmakers to sort of, just stream prices easily. And I said, "Oh, well, sure. Why do you need me for this particular client, though?" And they said, "Oh, I think it might be interesting to you. It's SpreadX." And I remember being slightly depressed because I remember in 2002, whatever, everyone coming up with their prices from scratch, whether it was Excel or pen and paper, whatever. Everyone coming up with their odds, and we got to this point, and it's fine. It's logical. It's cost effective. If everyone's price is going to generally go towards each other anyway, if Bet365 and Pinnacle are going to converge, or BetCris and Circa, or whichever source is Betfair, if everything is going to go towards the same point, paying someone to come up with that idea and get to that same point, I get it. But and I did think to myself, the reality is that SpreadX, like everyone else, they had to offer more and more products, more and more stuff. And you couldn't pay. Like, I remember I was in a room of like 30 traders, and some traders, like horse racing meetings. Let's say there's 5 horse racing meetings, 1 trader per horse racing meeting on a day. Literally, like golf, a weekly golf tournament, 2 golf tournaments, 2 traders, a trader to do 1 whole tournament by themselves. Didn't have to worry about anything else, just 1 tournament. Like, the amount of like labor that could be given to it was just huge, and dedication. And you couldn't do that. You need the same number of traders that Bet365 has if you wanted to do that much stuff. So, and that's expensive. So it's kind of like, I still think that all those brains that were brought up in spread betting and who think in that way, it's not about over, under, it's how much under, how much over.
Exactly.
I think that generates a wonderful skill set and way of thinking about markets. But yeah, whether SpreadX has the time to breathe and have the same strength of pricing, I don't know. Do you know what? I haven't placed a spread bet in many, many years. So I couldn't even tell you, I suppose that, like I say, the models they built, a lot of the models that spread betting built even 10 years ago are actually still slightly better than some of the more advanced models that have come since at other bookmakers. They're really good stuff. And yeah, the brains are good, but whether it's not a thriving industry. It's hard to get customers for that. If people think it's hard to get exchange customers, it's nothing compared to trying to get spread betting customers. Really hard. You need customers, it generally requires a higher net worth customer. It requires them to be able to understand complex things. It's often in time and time again, a new spread betting account within its first 100 bets will have a bet that goes really badly, and that then scares them terribly. And so it's a really hard product to really get people comfortable with and enjoying it. But by contrast, the people who do love it adore it, and they tell everyone about it, and they say how great it is. They're your best marketing. The people who fall in love with it, they're incredible. But it's niche. And also the less customers you have betting against you, like, to keep, as a bookmaker, to be sharper, you need lots of different customers betting, and not just even sharp customers. Because even getting the most money out of square business is a skill, right? It's not just defending, it's also maximizing. So, but less customers. If you're sat there and you take like 3 bets a day, it's hard to stay sharp. So, I'm sure some of my friends, I know some people still at SpreadX now, and I imagine that the same like hot fire that like was about to burn you every day 20 years ago, they probably don't have the same intensity of fire around them all the time. So I imagine it's hard to be quite as sharp. One thing that was always like apparent at Pinnacle is every single day there is hundreds of people trying to rip your face off every day, all the time. It's quite tiring. I finished like the first few weeks of my job there. I was literally exhausted, more tired than I'd been in 20 years working, because it's just emotionally like intense all the time. So, but that's what makes you better, right? You play against.
Yeah.
You love chess. You got to play against higher elo players. That's the only way, you know. And yeah, in Pinnacle, you were always playing against some good players.
It's even easier to play with stronger opposition than to play with weaker opposition, because the stress levels are completely different. You're mandatory to win sometimes in order to maintain your elo. So it's much more stressful to play lower rated players than to play against higher rated players. Give a final thought, if you can, to the Brazilian 20-year-old that bets on soccer and wants to be professional one day. Any thoughts? We could give him a hint.
Yeah, I would say the amount wagered on betting grows every single year. It's very easy to go online and be bombarded with information from everywhere telling you that things were always better 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And it's really hard to make money betting now. Or betting is not as good now as it was then, whatever. The pie, the global portion of money in the betting pool is getting bigger. It gets bigger every year. Focus on how you get your piece of the pie. Don't complain about it. Don't moan about it. You know, you need to figure it out. If it means finding out about crypto, you find about crypto. If it means going down to the betting shops, that's what you do. If it means networking and meeting new people, if it means flying to, live in Lisbon for a month because you heard that someone there is doing something cool with betting, then you do it. It's if you're going to commit to it now, if the question is, would I tell an aspiring 20-year-old Brazilian bettor to do it? Well, I'd probably ask him, have you got any other interests? Yeah, no, I'm really into meme coins, trading on Kraken or whatever. And I'd be like, spend more time on that. That's an easier gateway right now to big money. Because let's be honest, like no one should pretend like they're not going into this to grind out the same shitty living that they would grind out if they worked in an office. We do this because we work for ourselves and because we want to make big money. So if there's another way in your life, if you're so Brazil, loads of brilliant coders now, loads of big companies. Coca-Cola, probably one of the biggest employers in Brazil, I think. These people, I remember SportRadar had loads of coders who came from Brazil. Excellent. Now, reality is that those guys, if they could get visas in the States, they're going to make more money than your bet. You need to have a really good betting journey to make that kind of money, So I would, but if we put aside that, if he's looked at all his options and he said, okay, still betting for me, I'd say just do not let yourself get limited. I don't mean limited but limited. Don't let your aspirations be capped. If you need to travel, you travel. If you need to meet new people, you meet new people. If you need to, open a bank account here, if you need to do this, because, if you're passionate about something, just don't do it half-assed, just go all in. If you've made this, and 20 is the best time to go all in. Too late for me. But at 20, the worst thing that happens is you're back living with your mom. And our mothers are wonderful people. It's not that bad. So, it's that would be my advice. But yeah, this idea that you go on, you meet these old guys who made millions or whatever. It's back in the day, Pinnacle, I could bet 50K on college totals 3 days before. It's ignore that guy. That's his life. No one gives a shit, you focus on your edges, making your edges better, there's money. When Brazil, when the real influx comes into Brazil and they are just trying to get customers, maybe they can't bonus, but they will just be trying somehow to ensure that they get as much of that Brazilian money as possible. They're going to do stupid shit. They're going to do stupid shit. They're going to offer those Serie D games they know nothing about in Brazil. They're going to offer dumb markets. they're going to be doing some supremely dumb shit. And you just got to be ready. You got to be like talking to all your friends. What are you going to do? Do I have enough time to do all the bets? No. Well, maybe I get a friend. We work together. We share the accounts. Whatever. You just make it happen. Like effort is the most important thing. So and effort, you can get dragged down if you listen to other people. It's bullshit. So I would say learn from people, but if you can, learn from positive people and embrace it and just give everything to it. However, if betting is the only thing available to you, it's going to be a hard journey, and that's all I'll say.
It is. Yeah, it is a brilliant answer. I was talking last week with someone very old. He's not going to mind I say this. Yeah, I was talking to someone very old in the industry, and we were discussing what's the hardest part, and the hardest part is to scale. With your scale, you're repeating yourself, you're repeating the movements, you are going to make it. It's sometimes monotonous, and this sometimes wears you out. Sometimes it's not easy, but it is what it is. Sir Matthew Trenhaile, thank you very much for your time. It was delightful to be in your presence. I'm going to do a small closure in Portuguese, but I would like you to say if it's possible for us to reach out. Where can we send you an idea of a project for you to try to see if it's interesting or not for your career?
So I'm on LinkedIn as Matthew Trenhaile, and I am on X as Matthew. I want to say _Trench. Is it? I think maybe.
We will put in the description of the video. So
Matthew _Trench. But yeah, so reach out to me on either of those two is fine.
Ok, thank you very much. Pessoal, foi assim. Foi uma das pessoas com quem eu mais aprendi ao longo dos anos, apesar de termos praticamente a mesma idade. É uma pessoa que está na indústria, sabe muito da indústria. Espero que gostem deste episódio. Não se esqueçam de carregar nos sininhos, favoritar, deixem os vossos comentários, façam perguntas, leiam conteúdos deste senhor que não há melhor no mundo. Muito obrigado a todos por terem estado aí. Foi um prazer estar com vocês.